Restaurant manager publicly shames employee after discovering she donated leftover food to homeless individuals in need. Abigail had always been a woman with a generous heart, someone whose essence was shaped by empathy and the desire to do good. Raised in a humble home, she got used to fighting for what she wanted from an early age. Her mother supported the household with small domestic services, washing, cooking, and cleaning for families who often barely recognized her effort. Abigail, from a very young age, understood that she needed to help, taking on responsibilities that other children her age couldn't even imagine. While other girls played or dreamed of a promising future, she worried about sharing the little they had with her younger siblings, who were still in school and needed everything to continue their studies. Despite the hardships, she never complained about life. On the contrary, she saw each opportunity as a gift and believed that small acts of kindness could make a difference. Her smile was always gentle, her posture humble, and her dedication to work exemplary. After many frustrating attempts and closed doors, she finally got a job as a waitress in a busy restaurant. The salary was modest, but enough to ensure her family had the bare essentials to live. Abigail worked every day with determination. From the moment she put on her apron and tied her hair to start her shift until the last task before closing for the night, her dedication was evident. She served customers with patience, always willing to offer a smile, even during the most tiring moments. During quieter times, she would organize the kitchen, cleaning counters, reorganizing ingredients, and ensuring everything was ready for the next rush. Despite the fast pace and constant pressure, she took pride in what she did. She liked knowing that her work was essential to the restaurant's operation, and that, in some way, she contributed to the satisfaction of the people who walked in. But at the end of each shift, something weighed heavily on her heart. The absurd amount of food wasted at the restaurant made her anxious. Dishes that hadn't even been touched, generous portions of rice and meat, still fresh pieces of bread, all of it was thrown away without hesitation. The rules were clear, nothing could be salvaged. This was the restaurant's standard procedure, something no one seemed to question. But Abigail questioned it. The image of that food being discarded while so many people on the streets went hungry tormented her. Every night, seeing bags full of food being taken out to the trash, she felt a tightness in her chest, a growing unease that wouldn't leave her in peace. This restlessness became unbearable until one day she made a decision. She couldn't watch that waste anymore without doing something. Without talking to anyone, without asking for permission, she started to act. One night after finishing her shift, she waited for everyone to be distracted and discreetly set aside some leftover food that was still perfectly fine. She packed it into a small bundle and placed it inside her bag. She left the restaurant with a racing heart, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. She walked through the nearby streets, where she knew some homeless people took shelter at night. As soon as she spotted an elderly man sitting on the sidewalk with a thin blanket and a tired look, she hesitated for a moment, but soon approached. "Good evening, sir," said Abigail, trying to sound casual. The man looked up at her, surprised by the approach. "Good evening, girl. What's going on?" She extended the package with trembling hands. "It's not much, but there's food here. It's clean, still good to eat, if you want." The old man looked at the package and for a moment seemed unable to react. When he finally took it, his expression softened. "Thank you very much. You don't know how much this means to me. I haven't eaten properly in days." Abigail felt a lump in her throat but forced a smile. "I just hope it helps a little." That night, on her way home, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a tremendous peace. Her heart felt light, as if she had finally done something right, something necessary. The next night she repeated the gesture, and again the next night. Each time she handed a package of food to someone in need, she felt she was restoring a bit of dignity to someone who had lost so much. To her, it wasn't a crime, it was simply an act of humanity. The nights became a ritual. She started to get to know some of the homeless people by name. There was Mrs. Shirley, an elderly lady with grey hair and a sweet voice, always grateful with tears in her eyes. There was Timothy, a silent man who just nodded in gratitude. Each person had a story, and Abigail found herself more and more involved with their harsh realities. Some nights, she would sit for a few minutes to talk before heading home. She heard stories of loss, struggles, and dreams interrupted by cruel fate. And each story strengthened her conviction that she was doing the right thing. At home, her mother began to notice that something was different. "You've been coming home a little later lately, Abigail," the woman said one evening as she served a cup of tea at the modest kitchen table. Abigail hesitated for a moment before responding. "Yes, Mom, I've been doing something after work." Her mother looked at her with concern. "Something? What do you mean?" She took a deep breath and then told her. She spoke about the food being wasted, the people she met on the streets, and how she couldn't ignore the hunger written on the tired faces. Her mother remained silent for a while, absorbing the words. "I understand, daughter. But isn't this dangerous? What if your boss finds out? I know it's risky, Mom, but I can't just turn a blind eye to this. How can I throw food away knowing that people are starving just around the corner?" Her mother sighed, holding her daughter's hand. "You've always had a good heart, Abigail. Just be careful. Not everyone will understand what you're trying to do." And she was right. Frank was a methodical, rigid man with little flexibility. Since he had taken over as the restaurant manager, he made sure to keep order with a firm hand, leaving no room for deviation. For him, rules existed for a reason and had to be followed strictly without exceptions. He didn't like employees who tried to stand out, who broke rules on their own, or who thought small acts of deviation would go unnoticed. Nothing escaped his sharp eye, and he prided himself on his ability to keep everything under control. He was an intimidating figure, always standing upright with a serious expression and a sharp gaze. He made a point of keeping a certain distance from the staff. He didn't like unnecessary closeness and rarely showed empathy. His focus was on ensuring the restaurant ran perfectly without mistakes, unnecessary waste, but also without any concessions. At first, the small amounts of missing food didn't attract his attention. At the end of each night, the kitchen always had leftovers, and although he insisted on immediate disposal, he knew that waste was inevitable in busy establishments. However, over the weeks, he began to notice something that didn't add up. The quantities being discarded seemed smaller than usual. The daily logs showed numbers that didn't make sense, and some portions that should have been in the trash simply weren't. Frank furrowed his brow as he reviewed the kitchen's numbers. He flipped through the notes, trying to identify any patterns. He picked up one of the sheets and read aloud to himself in the small office at the back of the restaurant. 5 portions of rice were supposed to be discarded yesterday, but only 3 were logged. Same thing the day before, and 3 days ago. Weird. He pushed the papers aside and rubbed his chin. Could it be a recording error, or was someone taking food without permission? To him, the mere thought of an employee disrespecting the rules was unacceptable. He decided to observe the behavior of the team more closely. In the following days, he spent more time in the dining area during closing, pretending to organize papers or check stock. His eyes were on the lookout for any suspicious movements. He saw the employees cleaning tables, organizing the kitchen, and saying goodbye one by one. Everything seemed normal, but something bothered him. That's when he started to notice a pattern. Abigail, one of the waitresses, always left with her bag slightly bulging. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. Maybe she was carrying a jacket, a notebook, or something else. But night after night, the scene repeated. When everyone finished their shift, she always left, glancing discreetly around and holding her bag a little more tightly than usual. His curiosity turned to suspicion. He decided to test her. One night, as she was getting ready to leave, He casually approached. "Good night, Abigail. Heading home?" Abigail jumped slightly before forcing a smile. "Yes, sir. It was a long shift tonight." Frank crossed his arms. "It really seems so. Must be tough carrying that heavy bag after such a long day, don't you think?" She held the shoulder strap of her bag tighter. "Oh, it's nothing. Just some of my things." Frank kept his gaze fixed on her for a moment before giving a small, humorless smile. "I see. Have a good rest then." She nodded quickly and left. He watched her until she disappeared down the street. Something inside him told him there was more in that bag than just personal belongings. In the following days, his surveillance became even more intense. Frank began doing rounds in the kitchen before closing, personally checking the waste. He spoke with the staff, asked casual questions, observed their reactions. Abigail continued to leave with a full bag, and the more he noticed her behavior, the more certain he became that she was hiding something. But he needed concrete proof. Then he came up with a plan. On one of the busiest nights, he stayed at the restaurant until the very end, pretending to deal with administrative issues. He patiently waited for everyone to finish their tasks without showing any signs of suspicion. Then, at the exact moment, he hid in a discreet corner of the kitchen between the shelves of supplies where he could observe without being seen. He watched Abigail approach the sink, look around, and quickly grab a small container of still intact food. She carefully wrapped it up, checked to make sure no one was around, and hid it in her bag. Frank's eyes narrowed. Now, there was no doubt. He took a deep breath, holding back the urge to act immediately. No, he wouldn't do it now. He wanted to catch her at the perfect moment. He wanted her to know exactly what it meant to break his rules. His lips curled into a cold smile. Now, it was just a matter of time until Abigail learned the price of defying the rules. The next morning, Frank arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. He felt consumed by a cold, calculated rage. He had spent the night reflecting on what he would do, repeatedly replaying the scene of Abigail taking the leftovers. To him, it wasn't just a violation of the rules, it was a betrayal. He wouldn't tolerate an employee challenging his authority in that way. No, he needed to set an example. He needed to show everyone who was in control. When Abigail walked into the restaurant, she felt a shiver run down her spine at seeing Frank standing in the middle of the dining room, arms crossed, with a stern look fixed on her. The atmosphere in the place was heavy, filled with invisible tension. The silence around her made her heart race. "Everyone here! Now!" Frank shouted, his voice echoing through the restaurant. The employees exchanged worried looks before approaching. Abigail stood still, feeling the weight of each step she took toward the group forming around her. As soon as everyone was gathered, Frank pointed an accusing finger at her. "Here's our hero, the woman who decided that the rules of this restaurant don't apply to her." Abigail's eyes widened, surprised by the aggressive approach. "Sir, I can explain." "Explain." Frank laughed, but it was a dry, cruel laugh. "Explain how you were stealing food from this restaurant? How, instead of being grateful for the work we give you, you decided to act behind the scenes like a thief?" The employees around her froze, some lowering their heads in embarrassment, while others just watched the scene without reacting. Abigail felt her face flush, her hands beginning to tremble. "I wasn't stealing. I just couldn't see that food going to waste when there are people starving outside," Frank interrupted her harshly, stepping closer. "Oh, so now you think you're a hero? You think you're a good Samaritan, Abigail?" He tilted his head with a mocking smile. "Must be nice, right? To feel so superior to us, like you're the only one who cares." She shook her head, desperate to make him understand. "It's not about that. You just broke the rules," Frank shouted, his voice now filled with uncontrollable fury. "Do you think you know better than management? That you can decide what to do with what belongs to the restaurant? Do you know what happens when we give food away for free? People start crowding at the door. That drives away customers. That hurts the business. Did you even think about that? Or were you too busy thinking you're a saint? Abigail swallowed hard. I just couldn't ignore. And I can't ignore an irresponsible employee who shames this team. He turned to the other employees, gesturing in exasperation. Would you trust someone like her? Someone who acts behind the company's back? Someone who thinks they can decide what's right and wrong? The silence was absolute. No one answered. No one dared to speak. Some employees looked away. Others seemed uncomfortable. But no one defended Abigail. She felt a knot tighten in her throat. Her vision blurred with the tears that threatened to fall. She had never been treated like this before, never felt such humiliation. Frank crossed his arms. If you care so much about feeding the homeless, go do it with your own money. Here, you don't work anymore. Hand over your apron and leave. Time seemed to slow for Abigail. Her body wouldn't move. She looked at her colleagues one last time, trying to find a trace of support. But all she found were indecisive, fearful faces. They were afraid to speak, afraid to face him. With trembling hands, she slowly untied her apron. She folded it carefully, as if that gesture was the only way to keep her dignity intact. She handed it to Frank, who took it without ceremony, not even looking at her. Abigail swallowed her sobs and turned away, walking toward the exit without saying another word. Her steps felt heavy, each one harder than the last. The silence in the restaurant was deafening, and she could feel the stares burning into her back. The cold air outside hit her face like a slap, intensifying the burning shame inside her. She didn't know where to look, didn't know what to do with her trembling hands at her sides. Her body felt moved by pure inertia, and the humiliation burned inside her like live embers. The weight of it all pressed down on her shoulders, suffocating and overwhelming. That was when she heard a familiar voice, soft, hesitant but full of concern. Abigail? She looked up and saw Shirley, the elderly woman who helped every night with the restaurant's leftovers. Shirley was a few steps ahead, hesitating, watching her with eyes full of unease. Her thin body was wrapped in a worn blanket, and her wrinkled hands held the edge of the fabric tightly. The cold wind tousled her grey hair, but she didn't seem to feel the biting breeze. She only had eyes for Abigail. "Girl, what happened?" Shirley asked, walking slowly toward her. "Why are you crying?" Abigail tried to answer, but her voice failed. The image of the scene in the restaurant came to her mind so clearly that she felt a tightness in her chest. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to compose herself, but it was impossible to hide the pain. "They fired me, Shirley." Her voice came out broken. "They humiliated me in front of everyone. They called me a thief, ungrateful, and all because I just wanted to help. Because I couldn't let you go hungry while they threw food in the trash." Shirley's eyes shimmered with tears, and her expression twisted with something between pain and anger. "Oh, my girl." She slowly shook her head. "This isn't right. Not after everything you've done. You have such a good heart. How can they treat you like this?" Abigail let out a bitter laugh, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Because to them, money and rules matter more than people, more than hunger, more than dignity." Shirley held her cold hands between hers, squeezing them tightly. "Don't let them make you doubt who you are, daughter. What you did was right. It always was. Never let anyone make you believe otherwise." Abigail swallowed hard, trying to hold on to those words. "But now, Shirley, I lost my job. I don't know what I'm going to do." Shirley gently caressed her hand. "Destiny never closes a door without opening another, my girl. And you are strong. You'll find a way." They stood there for a while, hands joined, the silence between them like an invisible hug. Finally, Abigail sighed and squeezed Shirley's hands one last time before saying goodbye. "Thank you for reminding me what matters." Shirley smiled, a tired smile, but full of tenderness. "Always, daughter." Abigail walked home with a heavy heart, but Shirley's words echoed in her mind like a thread of hope. However, the reality of her situation still haunted her. She had lost her job, been publicly humiliated, and now didn't know what to do next. When she entered her house, her mother noticed the sorrow on her face and welcomed her with a silent hug, allowing her daughter to cry on her shoulder. The following days were hard. Abigail tried to recover, but the feeling of emptiness and helplessness was overwhelming. The restaurant continued to run as always, and Frank still held his position, as if nothing had happened. But the town was small, and news traveled fast. Customers who knew her for her smile and dedication began to question her absence. Some asked employees discreetly what had happened, and soon the story came out. "Did you hear what happened to Abigail?" a customer whispered to another woman as they waited for their meals. "She was fired in such a cruel way. The manager humiliated her in front of everyone." "What? That sweet girl? But why?" "Because she gave food to homeless people, leftovers that were going to waste. Can you believe that?" The word spread. Indignation grew among those who frequented the restaurant and knew Abigail for her kind service. Comments started to appear on social media, criticizing the management's stance, especially Frank's cruelty. Some customers stopped going to the place in protest. Others, more direct, made it clear to the staff that they didn't agree with what had been done. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere also began to change. Before, the employees had been afraid to question Frank, but after seeing how Abigail was treated, they began to view him differently. "Do you think he overreacted?" one of the waitresses whispered to a colleague in the kitchen. "Overreacted? He destroyed the girl, treated her like a criminal just because she didn't want to throw food in the trash," the other replied, looking around to make sure no one heard them. The murmurs grew. Some employees started to feel guilty for not speaking up when Abigail was humiliated. Others became angry about the injustice and began to avoid Frank whenever they could. The restaurant's management didn't take long to realize the problem. The number of complaints increased every day, and the establishment's reputation began to suffer. When an online petition asking for justice for Abigail started circulating, gathering signatures from loyal customers, the situation became untenable. Pressured, the owners decided to take action. Frank was called to an emergency meeting. When he entered the owner's office, his expression was one of confidence. But when he saw the serious faces before him, something inside him trembled. "Frank," one of the owners began, crossing his hands on the table, "we've received numerous complaints in the past few days about your conduct with one of our former employees." Frank snorted, crossing his arms. "If you're talking about that girl, know that she broke the rules. I just did what needed to be done." "What needed to be done?" The other owner raised an eyebrow. "You publicly humiliated her, destroyed her reputation, and treated someone who worked hard for us like a criminal. She was stealing. She was trying to prevent good food from being wasted while people were starving outside." The owner's voice came out firm. "And now, because of you, our image is tainted. You've put us in a delicate position, Frank. And after evaluating everything, we've decided your position here is no longer viable." The silence weighed in the office. Frank looked from one to the other, incredulous. "You're firing me after everything I've done for this restaurant?" "After everything you've done against it," the owner corrected. "You're officially dismissed. Please pack your things and leave the premises today." For the first time, Frank had no answer. He left the office with his face red with rage and humiliation. His reign had come to an end. Meanwhile, Abigail was still recovering from the blow of her dismissal, but then something unexpected happened. One morning, while helping her mother tidy up the house, she heard a knock on the door. When she opened it, she found a man and a middle-aged woman both smiling gently. "Are you Abigail?" the woman asked. "Yes, I am," she replied hesitantly. "My name is Nancy, and this is my husband Gary. We heard about what happened to you and we wanted to talk." Abigail furrowed her brow, surprised. "About what?" Gary smiled. "About a job." Abigail's heart skipped a beat. "A job?" Nancy nodded. "At our cafe. We don't throw away food. We work in partnership with organizations that distribute meals to vulnerable people. You seem like exactly the type of person we want by our side." Abigail felt her eyes tear up. "But you don't care about what happened? About what they said about me?" Gary laughed. "We care. We care because we know what you did was right. If you still want to work with this, we'd love for you to join our team." Abigail covered her mouth, trying to hold back the emotion. She never imagined that her actions could open a new door. I'd love to." From that day on, her life changed. Working at the cafe was a new beginning, but also a purpose. There, she didn't just serve customers, but also helped prepare food that would be delivered to needy families. Her name began to be associated with solidarity, and humanitarian organizations started reaching out to her for hunger-fighting projects. What had once been a pain became strength. Her experience at the restaurant taught her that doing good wasn't always easy, but it should never be a reason to give up. She understood that even in the face of injustice, she would never stop being who she was. Her heart remained light because she knew that sometimes the path of kindness might be tough, but there's always something greater waiting for those who refuse to turn a blind eye to others' suffering. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.